Hi, welcome to Nina in the Kitchen, where today I am teaching my Bread 101 class. This is a class that I would offer to beginner bread makers. It always filled up so quickly, so I know a lot of people out there have basic questions about bread making. Perhaps this is your first bread. You will succeed making this bread. Or if you are just a beginner and you have questions, hopefully we'll cover those today. And if you have a question that I didn't cover, just ask below in the comments and I will get back to you. So Bread 101, we're going to cover a lot of stuff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. What I like to do is I have this scale. If you'll notice, the readout is off to the side so that when I turn it on, even if I have a bowl on it, and of course this isn't going to give you this is weighing the flour as well as the bowl, but as you can see, it's off to the side, so even with the bowl in front of me, I can see what it says. And that's an important feature. So is what's called a tare feature. Let's say you're making a cake or bread. You go down to, whoops, there we go. You want to add something else for, let's say, 200 grams. You can zero it out. That's called a tare feature, and that's something that you want to look for if you're shopping for a scale. So I do like to scale my bread out, and I do like to use grams. And the reason for the grams is just a number. With grams, you don't have fractions, which drive me crazy because some recipes in America are being written as in cups or in ounces. I don't know what a quarter of an ounce is. That doesn't mean anything to me. But a gram is simply number 36. So you hit 36. If you're not weighing your flour, this is what you want to do when you put your flour into a cup. The first thing you do is take a spoon or a scoop and you fluff it. And you just keep doing this until you feel it lighten up. And it's amazing how much air you can get in here. When it's nice and fluffy, you put that into your cup and then you scoop. And that's 1 cup. And this should weigh about 120 or 125 in grams for an all-purpose flour. So the reason I'm using all-purpose flour instead of bread flour is because with an American sandwich bread, you want a tight crumb and you want it to be very tender. You want it to just sort of melt in your mouth, if you will. The bread flours have a higher protein level, and the protein transfers into the amount of gluten strands that you get. If you have a high protein, like a bread flour, it's at about 12% protein, the one I buy is anyway, and you're going to be able to make those big holes that you see in these artisan breads, like a ciabatta or a baguette. We don't want that here. We want something that's more tender, not as chewy, and so that's why I'm going all-purpose flour. I wanted to show this to you too before we get started. These are bowl scrapers. This one is silicone. It's very, very light and very flexible, as you can see. This will scrape a bowl so clean. Look at that. These work like nothing else I've ever used. This is for very powdery things and also very light batters and things like that. This works really well. These other 2 bowl scrapers that I have are stiff. Now, these are under $3 each. I like this one for the shape of a bowl. If I'm doing a heavier wet dough, I like using this one. So I use all 3, very inexpensive tools, and I think it's critical to have one if you're making breads. Let's get into these other ingredients, and then I promise we will start mixing everything. I'm going to do this by hand today. I thought I would show you how to properly knead and when to know you're ready, you're finished, and so on. So what I have is instant yeast. And if you look at it, you'll see that it's very fine. If you look at it closely or next to active dry yeast, then you'll see that this is chopped finer than that. What's nice about instant yeast is that you can put it right into your dry mix. You don't have to dilute it in water and wait for it to prove. You just put it in with your dry ingredients, so it's so convenient. It tastes just as good, and so I love it. That's what I use. Now, if you're using an active dry yeast, what you would do is take some water about 1/3 of a cup of water for this recipe, which I have here. Put your yeast in the water and wait for it to look foamy, and that's called proving or proofing. Either word is correct. So when you proof that, you see that it's active and that it works, and then you can use it. Alrighty, so next up is the salt. I'm just using kosher salt. If you're using an active dry yeast, you absolutely want to keep your salt separate from your yeast. Yeast will be retarded in growth by salt. I'm just going to put it off to the side like this. Because this is an instant yeast, they can blend together in here. I'll just start doing that. Just mix it up. Next, what's going in are the wet ingredients. So here I have 3 tablespoons of butter, which I've melted. And I'm going to use honey in this recipe too. So I'm just going to grease up my tablespoon measurement and put all of this in. The reason for oiling the tablespoon is it's much easier to get this honey out of the tablespoon. Look at that, it just goes right out. If this was not buttered or oiled, this honey would be a sticky mess. So 3 tablespoons of honey. This American bread is called an enriched bread, and the reason it's enriched is because we're adding things to it that give it a lot of really good flavor. The butter is one. Sometimes these recipes will have egg in it. Today I'm using milk. This is 1 cup of milk. I'm pouring that in. And all of these enrichments give it flavor, but it also weighs this bread down a little bit. So you want to keep that in mind, because this may not rise if you've made bread before where you did not have an enrichment. You may have gotten a higher rise from it, and that's why. This is 1/3 cup of water, which we would have used had I used active dry yeast. But that goes right in. And then you just take your hand or a spatula or a spoon. In this case, I'm using my handy dandy little bowl scraper here, and I'm just going to mix all of this in. Those liquids were warm, and by warm I mean about 110 to 115 degrees. You don't have to keep a thermometer. All that you need to do is just take a few drops, put it on your wrist like you would test a baby bottle. It's the same thing, and that is going to let you know that you have some warm dough. I'm just going to take my scoop and put that right on the counter. And then that way I don't have to, if I want to put some flour down, I can just sprinkle like that. I'm not going with my dirty hands back into my big container of flour. And this is where these bowl scrapers really shine. Look at this. Best $2 you'll ever spend. So I'm just going to put a little flour in there. At this point, you want to keep in mind how much flour you're actually using. I know I'm going to use probably a 1/4 cup more flour than I have added into the recipe. And recipes, when you use them, they will tell you sometimes that you can expect to use another up to a cup of flour. And this is why, because you'll need something on your counter. So when you knead dough, what I'm doing is I am not pushing, I'll show you, I'm not pushing down into the dough. When you do that, you're exposing all of this wet inside of this dough. What you want to do is take your dough, fold it over, and push it, think of it as pushing it across the surface of your counter. Just like that. And amazingly, and because I weighed the dough out rather than volume measurements, it's amazing how your dough comes together with a weighed dough rather than with the volume. Weighing your dough is so much easier overall, and you don't have a lot of little cups to clean up. So I'm just going to keep kneading like this. This dough is already getting stronger from when I first turned it out onto the tabletop. But how you tell where you are, and we are certainly not ready to stop kneading yet, but if you pick your dough up and it just easily breaks like this, it's a weak dough right now. You see I don't have many gluten strands. they will form, and it's just a matter of working it. This is ready to go. This is really a beautiful dough, and it's easy to work with. I've been kneading this for 10 minutes. I want to show you how you know that you're finished. On this bread, I can, look at that, it's just beautiful. I can form it into a ball, push into it, and this springs right back up. That's one way to tell. Another is to just pick it up and see, does it hold? And then there's a third test. It's called the window pane test. It's a good one to know. For the window pane test, what you do is you take a little piece of dough and then you just gently stretch it out. And if you can see light through this membrane and you're not tearing the dough, that is a sign that you have gluten development and that your bread will rise beautifully. And that's why you knead. This has the butter in it and the honey. It makes it a really easy dough to work with. It's just so beautiful. So I'm going to shape this into a ball and put it into a bowl and let it rise. My bowl scraper got this bowl so clean that I'm just using this. That's how easy making bread is. You don't have to be fussy. I have a few drops of oil in the bottom, and by a few drops I mean maybe half a teaspoon. I'm going to take my dough, because you want both sides oiled. So I'm going to take my dough, put it in the bottom, just move it around, and then flip it over. And now I have the top lightly oiled, and the bottom of this is also lightly oiled. And the reason for that is you just want to protect this from getting a crust on it. I'm going to put a lid on this. You can put plastic wrap, whatever you want. I just find it easier to do this. You put it on, take it off, wash, done. So this is going to sit until it's double in size, and I'm guessing that'll be about 50 or 60 minutes. It depends on the ambient temperature in your kitchen. You can, if you have a gas stove with a pilot light, just with the pilot light on, it will bring the temperature up a few degrees and you'll get a faster rise. If you want to slow this down and make a really delicious, tasty, flavorful, complex bread, you can put this in your refrigerator, let it rise overnight, and that gives you a really delicious flavor. So the slower rise, really delicious flavor. I had a great question from one of my students one day. They asked, can you freeze dough? So here's the thing with freezing dough. I don't recommend it unless you're doing something like a pizza or a focaccia where you want just something flat. Because what can happen in the freezer is the yeast cell is permeable and it can be damaged by the freezer. So all of the yeasties that are all around the periphery of your bread or of your dough can be damaged by freezing. So the better option is to bake it, then wrap it in foil, and then put it in a Ziploc bag, you get all the air out, and freeze that for up to a month. That's how you freeze bread. This has doubled in size, and one way that you can tell is if you look at this, it went from a very smooth ball to, I don't know if you can see it on its surface, you get these little, what is called fermentation bubbles. Just these little bubbles all around the periphery of the dough and over the top of it. So look for that. And it smells so good already. We're going to put this into a bread tin or a bread pan. And I just wanted to show you two very different styles. This pan is years old. It makes a fine loaf, but the loaf is rather rounded. And as you can see, I used cooking oil on this. Before I knew about this, I used cooking oil. This is a non-stick surface, so you want a little bit of like butter or something on here, but what cooking oil does is it actually stays on the pan itself. You cannot get that off. And I can't scratch the surface because it's non-stick. So over the years, it's just gotten gunky. Whereas this pan is nice and clean. And the reason is that I have either used butter on it or I've used baking spray. Baking spray and not cooking spray. I love the profile on this too because it makes that iconic Wonder Bread look, right? You have the smaller edge down here and it sort of comes up and gives you this beautiful bread. So the profile on this bread is what I'm going to go for. And then one last thing, when you cover the bread, you can use something like a pan as long as you have the boundaries that aren't going to impinge on the loaf. The thing that I like to use is, and this is only used, this is not used as a shower cap. I use this only for breads, but I just put something like this over it. Some people put them into like a garbage bag or something that's big where you can balloon it out like this. What you don't want to do is use a plastic wrap. Even if you oil that plastic wrap, you have to peel it off of the dough and it can ruin the dough. So I'm just going to use a baking spray quickly and then we'll degas this bread. At this point, if I'm going to use anything on my work surface, I'm not using flour any longer. The less flour you use after you finish the recipe, the better off you are. So I'm going to just take this out of here. This was the top of the dough in the bowl, and this is always going to be the top. So I'm going to make sure I'm working on the bottom. The bottom is stickier, and you can feel the difference. So I'm just going to shape this out to about an 8-inch square. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so again, this is the bottom. What I'm going to do is use my hands to peel underneath, bring it up and over, and then use my thumbs to push back. And bring these two ends in. I call that dog ears. So up and over, push it back, and you just keep doing that. And this will create your loaf for you. Now, I have a seam at the bottom, so all I'm going to do is just pinch along that seam, bring the two ends, because they're pointy, bring those two ends in, and pinch them closed. And then this goes into your pan. At this point, this is malleable. So if you have, sometimes you end up with a skinny little waist like this. So you can always just sort of press it into the shape that you want at this point. And this goes right into your loaf pan. And even after you get it in there, you might want to just make sure you're filling it evenly. You got a big bubble, you can pinch it. Okay, now I'm going to let this rise, or the second rise typically is probably going to be about 30 minutes. So the second rise goes a little faster, and I'll show you how to know when it's ready to go into the oven. So right now I'm going to heat my oven to 400 degrees. It will take about probably 15-20 minutes to get to 400, and just keep it there. Once your oven goes up to temp, it doesn't take much energy to keep it running, and just let it sit at that temperature so that when this goes in, what happens is you put your bread in, it rises in this brand new burst of energy, if you will. That's called oven spring, and you need that hot heat to perform that. So 400, I'll see you when this is ready to go in. I just love making bread. This is just so beautiful to me. So here we have this bread that when you feel it, you can feel it's very spongy and marshmallowy. If I touch it like this, it's going to spring back, but very slowly. You can see I did it over here a little while ago. So if it springs back too quickly, that means it's underproofed. You do not want to put it in the oven because it has so much rising power that what would happen in that case is you have what I call a blowout. You're going to have a big crack down here or some form of expansion that you didn't plan on or that you don't want. If it's overproofed, and that's a real rookie mistake to overproof it, this does not come back at all. You put your finger in there gently and it just sinks and stays there. What happens then is it will go in the oven, and instead of springing up that one last boost, it just sort of collapses on itself. And you may even have a crust and then a pocket of air under that crust, and then your bread. No matter what you do though, this bread will be more delicious than any bread you can purchase in a supermarket, I guarantee you. So now you have to score it. What scoring bread does is it controls how this will rise in the oven. I think this may be either perfect or perhaps a little underproved. So I'm going to score deeper than just a 1/2 inch, which is typical. So just go in and you want to be quick. Don't be slow about this. Quick, quick. If you go too slow, what happens is you create a drag. Okay, I think that looks good. I'm going to pop it in the oven. The oven is 400. I'm leaving it there for 15 minutes. By then it will have risen, the crust will have started to set, and then I'm going to drop the oven temp to 350 and bake it the rest of the way at 350 for probably 30 to 40 minutes, depending on your room temperature, the oven, and so on. So, but the first thing that happens when your bread is baked is you begin to smell the aroma. I love it. I'll be back later. Okay. It's almost ready. I can hear it. It's trying to sound hollow, but there's a little tinny sound to it. It's not quite ready. I'm going to put this back in the oven without the tin. I'll just put it on the rack like that for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll be back. And hopefully you can hear the sound difference. Look at this beautiful loaf. This pan, because it's a light tin, comes out with this beautiful light golden brown. And let's thump the bottom. That's perfect. With bread, the thump test really is the best. I used to, because recipes are written this way now, put a thermometer in. If you want to do that, you want to hit like 195 on this bread. But what happens with thermometers, and the reason that I stopped doing it, is before your crust even sets, you can get a temperature of 195 because everything inside is kind of bubbling and hot. So you can take it out and be tricked thinking that it's actually baked when it's not completely baked. So the best way to do it is just to train your eye and your thumb and your ears to what bread looks like when it's baked, and also how it sounds. And if you'll notice, I really could have gone deeper in that score. You see how this flattened out? It should be sort of like an envelope, but that's okay. I don't mind that at all. So now for the hardest part, just not touching it until it's cool, which is really, I hate that part of bread making. The honey and the butter has filled this kitchen with an aroma that is so incredible, but you can't touch it now. If you slice this right now, what happens is the inside is not set up yet. So all of those cells of air, if you will, just sort of crush in, and they're gummy, and it doesn't even taste good. So even though it's awfully tempting, you just have to walk away. Now for the moment of truth. Of course, this bread can be used for sandwiches, and it will be delicious. But I used this bread for turkey stuffing or dressing. Oh, that's perfect. Look at that. Beautiful crumb. Nice and even all the way around. It smells so good. So with turkey dressing, the reason I started making bread for Thanksgiving for the dressing is because breads today have so many enhancers, preservatives, that it doesn't stale properly. This bread, I will keep it frozen, take it out when I'm ready to make my stuffing or dressing, let it thaw, and it will stale within a day, 2 days at the max, and it'll be perfect. So let's see how this tastes. And of course there's bread pudding. There's all kinds of things you can do with this. My little butter bell. This crumb is so tender. Look at that. Really beautiful. And I know it's going to be delicious. And it is. Really good. By the way, when you make bread, the day that you make it, because this doesn't have any preservatives in it whatsoever, take your cut side and put it down on your cutting board, and that will keep the moisture inside the bread and stop it from staling for that day. And then after that, really the best way to preserve it is to freeze it. Wrap it, freeze it, or just eat it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something here. Contact me below in the comments. Thanks again. Bye, guys.